The wind came down from the mountains like a curse, rattling old shutters, scattering dust, and driving tumbleweeds through the bones of the town. Hollow Creek was little more than a collection of weather-beaten buildings clinging to a dirt road like regrets to a drunk man's conscience. Smoke curled from the blacksmith's chimney. The church bell rang without a soul inside, and in front of Harrow's General Store, the wedding was underway, just not hers. Clara Mae stood across the road with a loaf of sourdough wrapped in linen against her chest, watching through the frost-etched window pane as Miss Eliza Brewster laughed in her too-tight corset. The preacher's voice echoed faintly, drowned by wind and whispers. Clara's knuckles whitened against the bread. "Damn shame," muttered old Martha Pickens from behind her. "Girl like that, all alone with her hips and no husband. That kind of fat don't just carry itself away." Clara didn't flinch. She'd heard worse. From strangers, from neighbors, from the mirror. The weight of solitude was heavier than any cruel word, and she bore it with the same bitter patience she gave to kneading dough before dawn. Her boots sloshed through muddy slush as she turned to leave. Her cottage, 2 miles out, would be colder than usual tonight. She hadn't chopped enough wood. Again, winter did that to a body. Made you forget tomorrow existed. "Maybe God forgot her," someone said low but sharp. Laughter followed. She didn't look back. Every step felt louder than the wedding hymn behind her, like her boots were announcing her shame to the town. Her wool skirt clung, wet to her legs. Her shawl, patched and pilled, had once belonged to her mother. It still smelled faintly of lavender and ashes. Clara clutched it tighter. By the time she reached her gate, her fingers had turned red and stiff. She fumbled the latch, pushed inside, and placed the bread on the table beside a single pewter plate. The cottage creaked with the familiar loneliness of a place where only one chair was ever pulled out. She lit a lantern, set it near the window, and sat. Not for long. The silence started to squeeze. Clara pulled out her journal from beneath the bed. The leather cover was worn, the edges curled like autumn leaves. She dipped her pen and wrote. "Another wedding. Not mine. Of course not mine. I wore my good boots. No one noticed. Maybe I'll sell them. Buy bullets instead." She laughed bitterly and stopped writing. The knock came an hour later, sharp and unexpected. No one visited Clara Mae. She opened the door and saw Sheriff Walter Boone standing beside a man she didn't recognize, tall, broad-shouldered, with city shoes and a charcoal coat that didn't belong to these parts. Dust had dared stain his trousers, but he didn't seem to notice. His hair was dark, neatly parted, his eyes a thoughtful blue that didn't blink fast enough for a man who just arrived in Hollow Creek. "Miss Clara Mae?" the sheriff asked. She nodded slowly. "This here's Mr. Nathaniel Blackthorne. He's come from Carson City, looking for a wife." Clara's stomach dropped. She glanced at Nathaniel, wary, then back at Boone. "Why would you bring him here?" she asked, voice flat. Nathaniel spoke then. His voice was smooth but earnest, touched with something old-fashioned. "I heard your bred saved a ranch from starving through last winter, and your work with sick colts caught the attention of one of my men. I don't believe in gossip. I believe in results." Clara blinked. "I came to see if the woman behind those stories would speak with me," he continued. "Maybe more." Boone cleared his throat and stepped back into the night, leaving them alone. Clara folded her arms. "So, you're here to laugh like the rest of them? Came all this way for a joke?" Nathaniel furrowed his brow. "Miss Clara Mae, I don't joke about marriage." She opened her mouth, closed it, then stepped back and shut the door without another word. The next day, it was all over town. Clara sat alone in the back pew of the church, not for service, but for silence. The walls were cold, the candles snuffed, but she could still feel her mother's ghost singing old hymns in the cracks of the wood. It was the only place where no one came looking. Until he did. Nathaniel walked in like he belonged there. Hat in hand, respectful. "I came to apologize if I startled you," he said gently. "I realize now how it must have sounded." "You got no idea how it sounded," she muttered. "I suppose not, but I meant it." He sat in the pew ahead, facing backward. "Would you tell me your story, Miss Clara?" She scoffed. "Ain't much of a story. Born here, raised on sour milk and mule work. Ma died when I was 15. Pa followed soon after. Rest of my life's been bread, dead crops, and people laughing at me when they think I can't hear." He tilted his head. "They laugh because they know you make them uncomfortable. They laugh because you remind them of what they fear becoming, overlooked and underestimated." She stared at him. "I came west to find something real," he continued. "I have money, land, people who nod when I walk into a room. But I want a wife who can see through all of that. And I heard you could see through most things." Clara stood abruptly. "You mad?" "No," he said, rising. "I'm a man who knows value when he sees it." She stepped outside. He followed. In the street, folks stopped. Every head turned. Even the horses went quiet. Clara, red-faced, furious, turned on him. "You want to embarrass me in front of everyone? Here? Now?" Nathaniel didn't blink. "No, Clara Mae. I want to marry you." Laughter exploded. Someone shouted, "Maybe she's got gold buried under them skirts." Even the preacher's wife giggled. Clara's breath caught. The cold seemed to vanish. It was just her heart beating like a war drum in her chest. Her mouth moved, but no words came. She turned and walked away, each step burning hotter than the last. Nathaniel didn't follow. At home, she pulled the journal from under the bed again. He said he wanted to marry me. In public, like a damn fool. It hurts worse when they pretend it's real. I was better off when I was invisible. She didn't cry. Not then. That night, she chopped wood until her arms went numb. Then she lit every lamp in the house, just to prove she could. The next morning, a knock came again. She ignored it. Then another, and another. By the fourth day, she opened the door with a rifle in hand. Nathaniel stood there, soaked from rain, holding a basket of tools, books, and rosewood sewing needles. "Came a trade," he said. Clara blinked. "Trade what?" "Your time for mine. What in hell's name do you want from me?" "Your mind. Your company. Your opinion on which cattle breeds do best in drought. Your favorite type of berry for preserves. I want your voice, Miss Clara. If you'd share it." Clara lowered the rifle. Just a little. Days passed. He returned every afternoon. They sat outside when weather allowed. He asked her about soil. She taught him about blight. He showed her books with pressed flowers between the pages. She laughed, softly, unsure, when he mispronounced prairie towns. One evening, she made stew and forgot to put out the second bowl. He filled it himself. They didn't speak of marriage again until the 12th day. They sat beneath a cottonwood tree. The sunset painted fire across the sky. "I'm not a beautiful woman," she said suddenly, eyes locked on the horizon. "I disagree," he replied. She looked down. "I've never even been kissed." "I could change that," he said. Not bold, not mocking, just offering. She turned to him, heart trembling like a colt's legs. "Are you real?" she whispered. He smiled, real enough to bleed. A shot rang out. The tree behind them splintered. Horses screamed. 5 riders stormed into view, faces covered, guns raised. Clara shoved Nathaniel to the ground, rolled behind the stump, heart pounding. Bullets tore into bark. One ripped her shawl clean. Nathaniel groaned. Blood at his temple. "Stay down," she screamed, grabbing his coat and dragging him behind the trough. A voice shouted from the road, gruff and laughing. "That's the one. Grab the man. He's the prize." Clara lunged forward, grabbed Nathaniel's hand, but a boot slammed into her side and knocked her back. They dragged him away. Her scream cracked the air. "Let him go," another voice sneered. "Ain't no one coming for the fat widow's toy." Then they vanished into dust. The town watched from windows. Doors bolted. No one came to help. Hours passed before she stumbled back into her cottage, bleeding, hands shaking. No one asked if she was all right. At dawn, she wrote a single line in her journal. "They took him. They laughed at me. I'm done waiting." She stood in the mirror, staring at the bruises on her face. Her hand reached for the scissors. Strands of hair fell like rain. Her eyes hardened. Outside, the wind shifted. And for the first time in years, Clara Mae smiled, just a little. Because for once, she wasn't going to let the world decide who she was. Not anymore. The morning after the raid, the silence in Hollow Creek was sharper than any bullet. Clara stood on her porch, wrapped in a patched riding coat Nathaniel had once left behind. A garment far too fine for the likes of her, stitched from thick wool and lined with satin. She wore it now not for warmth, but as a reminder. He brought her roses in that coat. He bled in it, too. No one had come. Not the sheriff. Not the mayor. Not a neighbor to ask if she was still breathing. Her ribs ached with each breath. The side of her face was swollen and tinged yellow, where a boot heel had kissed her cheek. Still, she saddled the horse, a mare she'd bought from a drunk 2 summers ago, and began the slow, deliberate ride toward the sheriff's office. Sheriff Boone didn't look surprised when she kicked open the door. "I need your help," she said, voice low, eyes rimmed red but unbroken. Boone scratched at his beard, leaning back in his chair, boots on the desk like he'd been waiting on death and found boredom instead. "Ain't much I can do if they're already past the ridge, Clara. He's alive. Maybe. Maybe not. You want me to send a posse after outlaws who likely crossed state lines by now?" She said nothing. Boone shifted uncomfortably. "You ain't law. You ain't armed. Hell, you ain't even thin," she snapped. "Pretty? Worth saving." He glanced away. "Didn't say that. You didn't have to." He lowered his boots. "It's suicide, Clara." "No." She stepped closer, her voice cold. "It's marriage." Boone blinked. "You're still counting him your husband?" "I said yes before they came." "That makes it real." She turned and walked out, not waiting for approval. Her breath steamed in the morning light as she mounted up and headed south, away from the road, toward the trails less traveled, ones Nathaniel had once asked about during quiet evenings. She remembered everything, every glance, every question he'd asked about the land, the river forks, the ridge routes near the mining towns. It wasn't idle curiosity. Nathaniel Blackthorne had come prepared for war. He just hadn't expected it to find him wearing a wedding band. That night, she slept in a dry creek bed with her rifle across her lap and her back to a cold rock. Coyotes howled somewhere distant. She didn't flinch. She was done flinching. The second day, she met a boy on the trail, no older than 16, with a busted hat and boots too big for his feet. He carried news like disease, passed along from campfires and saloons. "You looking for the ones took that city feller?" he asked, squinting through the dust. Clara's eyes narrowed. "You know where they went?" The boy nodded. "Saw him ride through Dry Tooth Gulch. They wasn't hiding it none. Heard they got orders." "Orders?" "From some cattle bearing down by Perdition's Ridge. Talk is that feller you're after got claim to land that's making someone else nervous." Clara felt her spine stiffen. "Ooh, man named Voss. He owns more beef than there are stars. They say he wants to fence the valley. Your feller's ranch runs right through the heart of it." Her hands tightened on the reins. So that was it. Nathaniel hadn't been taken for love. He'd been taken for leverage. "You sure about this?" she asked. The boy shrugged. "Reckon so. You paying?" She tossed him a coin, spurred the mare forward, and didn't look back. By the 4th day, her supplies were dwindling. Her limbs ached, and her cheek had gone from yellow to purple. She made camp in the shell of an old lumber cabin, barely more than a roof with holes and a door that hung on one hinge. She was gathering firewood when the stranger appeared. He stepped from the trees like a shadow with a heartbeat, tall and lean, with a rifle slung low across his back and a Bowie knife sheathed at his thigh. His coat was stitched with patches of animal hide, and his eyes were the kind that had seen too much war. "I could have shot you," he said evenly. "You still can," she replied, not flinching. "But I'll scream first, and I'm not quiet." The man chuckled, low and dry. "You got bite. I've got bullets, too." He raised both hands. "Name's Elijah. I knew Blackthorne. Fought beside him once, back when fighting meant something." Clara lowered her rifle. "Then you know what kind of man he is." "I do." Elijah stepped closer, which is why I figure he wouldn't want a woman like you riding straight into a firestorm. She stiffened. "A woman like me?" "I meant strong, stubborn, and likely to get herself killed." She let the words settle. "I'd rather die trying than live with their laughter." Elijah nodded. "Then let's ride together." They moved by night. Elijah taught her how to walk without sound, how to read footprints in dry grass, how to smell the difference between man and horse in the dark. On the 6th night, they came to a canyon overlooking a hollow lit with firelight. Below, nestled beside a dried riverbed, was the outlaw camp, makeshift tents, wagons, and the glow of whiskey-fueled bravado. Clara crawled to the edge and peered down. Nathaniel was there, tied to a post, blood crusted on his face, one eye swollen shut. But alive, breathing. Clara's chest seized. Her grip on the rock tightened until her knuckles cracked. "We wait," Elijah whispered. "We go in after dawn. Less eyes. Fewer drunks." She didn't sleep. Just watched. Counted shadows. Named each outlaw in her head. Red shirt. Limping knife. Tall hat. Giggler. She made a list of who she'd shoot first. Not because it was wise, but because it was something she could control. Just before light, movement stirred below. A man stepped from the largest tent. Older, tall, with a silver vest that gleamed even in the pre-dawn haze. Clara recognized him from a portrait Nathaniel once showed her. "Voss," she whispered. The cattle baron approached Nathaniel with slow, calculated steps, like he was savoring every moment. "You look smaller up close," Voss said to Nathaniel, voice drifting up to the cliffs. "Not much of a threat after all." Nathaniel spat blood. "Still enough to take your name when I get free." Voss chuckled. "You won't. But that woman of yours, she's making waves." Clara's heart stopped. Voss turned toward the men gathered around. "Find her. Kill her." The crowd roared in agreement. Clara turned to Elijah. "We don't wait." He nodded. They slipped down the canyon like wolves, silent, methodical. Elijah took out the first guard with a stone to the temple. Clara grabbed his knife and slit the second one's throat before he hit the dirt. By the time the camp stirred, they were already inside. Clara ran to Nathaniel, cutting his bonds with shaking hands. "Thought I was dreaming," he croaked. She smiled, eyes filled with tears. "No such luck." Gunfire erupted. Elijah barked, "Move." They ran toward the horses. Bullets screamed past. Clara ducked behind a wagon, dragged Nathaniel after her. He was weak, but he moved. "Go," Elijah shouted. "I'll draw him off." "No," Clara shouted back. Elijah turned, grinned, then fired into the air, drawing half the camp his way. Clara lifted Nathaniel onto a horse, climbed behind him, and dug her heels in. They rode through fire and lead, Clara's arms wrapped tight around him, her heart louder than the gunshots behind them. They didn't stop until dusk. They made camp in a gulch, hidden by the curve of the land. Nathaniel collapsed beside the fire, groaning. Clara cleaned his wounds with a rag dipped in whiskey, biting her own lip every time he flinched. "You came," he whispered. "Of course I came. Even after everything," she said. "Even if you hadn't asked, I'd have come." He reached for her hand. She took it. Silence settled like snow. Then Clara asked, voice low, "Why me, Nathaniel? Why'd you ask me?" He looked at her with that same steady gaze. "Because you never looked away when I spoke. Because you listened. Because you didn't care about the shine on my boots. And because the first time you laughed, it sounded like home." Clara blinked hard. "I was scared," he added. "Not of the outlaws. Of you. Of what did it mean to fall in love with someone the world refused to see." She kissed his forehead gently, then stood, rifle in hand. "They see me now," she said. And somewhere, in the distant dark, thunder rumbled like the land was waking up to something fierce and unforgiving. Clara Mae was no longer the woman they mocked at the wedding. She was someone else entirely. And tomorrow, they'd learn what that meant. The wind cut sharp through the canyons, whispering warnings only fools would ignore. Clara Mae ignored them anyway. Her mare's hooves pounded a rhythm across the hard-packed earth, a syncopation of vengeance and resolve. Behind her, the rising sun lit the horizon like a prairie fire, but ahead was nothing but dust, jagged rock, and a last stretch of trail that led to Perdition's Ridge, the place where Voss made camp, where Nathaniel had nearly died, and where her answers waited behind loaded guns. Nathaniel rode behind her now, still healing, still stiff. Bruises marked his ribs and face, and a limp clung to him like a shadow, but he didn't protest. Not once. He'd been quiet since the escape, watching her with a look that was half awe and half worry, like he knew she was walking the line between mercy and madness, and feared which side she might fall on. Elijah had rejoined them that morning, a cut across his shoulder, his coat torn, but his eyes sharp. "They know we're coming," he said, keeping pace beside her. "You sure you still want to do this?" Clara didn't look at him. I didn't ride this far just to turn around. Elijah nodded. Then we don't knock. They reached the bluff before midday. The camp below was less a hideout now and more a fortress. Voss had fortified it with wagons, armed guards, and even a Gatling gun mounted on a platform facing the gulch. There were at least 24 men, maybe more. Clara dismounted, crouched low near the edge, and studied the layout. Her braid had come undone in places, black strands clinging to her wind-chapped cheeks. She looked leaner than before. Harder. The weight she'd once carried in her body now clung to her presence. Heavy, unyielding. Nathaniel joined her, kneeling with a wince. "They're expecting a frontal assault," she said. Elijah grunted. "We give him one. Then we get him from the side." Clara looked to Nathaniel. "You sure you can shoot?" "I can pull a trigger," he replied. She handed him a repeater and a flask. "You shoot straight. You live." Simple as that. They waited until dusk. When the shadows grew long and the wind began to howl across the plains, Clara stood. Her breath steamed in the cold. She looked down at the men who had dragged her husband away, who had mocked her pain, and treated her like cattle to be auctioned. Her fingers flexed around the rifle grip. "Elijah," she said. He pulled a fuse from his pack and grinned. "Showtime." They moved fast. Elijah slipped into the canyon and planted the dynamite near the outer fence line. Clara and Nathaniel circled wide, climbing the cliff behind the camp, where an old trail barely held to the rock. Halfway up, Nathaniel stumbled. Clara caught him. He looked at her, his face pale, jaw clenched. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." "Why?" She didn't answer right away. She looked out over the camp, her eyes gleaming with something fierce. "Because I spent most of my life being no one. I got one chance to be someone now, and I won't waste it." Nathaniel didn't try to stop her again. They reached the top. From there, they had a clean line of sight to the heart of the camp. Clara set up her rifle, aimed it toward the command tent where Voss always kept his boots dry and his back turned. Down below, Elijah lit the fuse. The explosion tore through the outer perimeter like a thunderclap from hell. Flames roared, smoke billowed, men screamed and scattered. Clara fired. The first bullet found a sentry mid-run. The second dropped a man trying to swing the Gatling gun around. Panic rolled through the camp like a kicked hornet's nest. Elijah charged through the smoke, his knife flashing. Clara moved from her perch, Nathaniel behind her, both firing as they descended the ridge. They hit the camp hard. Men fell. Horses screamed. The air stank of gunpowder and blood. Then the command tent ripped open, and Voss stepped out, flanked by 2 gunmen. Clara dropped one of them before he could raise his pistol. The second lunged for her. She ducked, slammed the butt of her rifle into his gut, then stabbed him with her boot knife. He crumpled at her feet. Voss stood alone. He was taller than she remembered, grayer, his expression unreadable. The man who had once ruled the valley with a smile now looked at her like she was something he couldn't quite understand. "You," he said. "Me," Clara replied. "I should have had them kill you. You tried." He reached for his revolver. She didn't hesitate. Her bullet hit his thigh, dropped him to one knee. "You'll hang for this," he hissed, hand trembling over the wound. "No," she said, stepping closer. "You will." Behind her, Nathaniel covered her back. Elijah dragged 2 more men from the wreckage, throwing them to the ground. By dawn, it was over. The camp was ash and silence. Clara stood in the middle of it, her hands blackened with soot, her hair damp with sweat, blood on her cheek that wasn't hers. The men who remained were tied and bound. Elijah had gone to fetch the sheriff. This time, Boone would come. The town would hear. Clara found Voss sitting against a burned wagon wheel, leg bound, face pale. "You know what hurts the most?" he asked her, voice rough. She tilted her head. "That a fat, nothing woman like you made me lose everything." Clara smiled coldly. "That's the thing, Mr. Voss," she said. "I ain't nothing anymore." She turned from him, walked back to Nathaniel, who stood with a blanket around his shoulders and a weary smile on his face. "You did it," he whispered. She shook her head. "We did it." He looked at her differently now. Not like someone he'd saved, not like someone he pitied, but like someone he respected. They stood in the broken camp, fire crackling around them, the sun rising over the blood-stained earth. Clara looked out at the horizon. There was more to do, more to rebuild. But for the first time in her life, she knew who she was. Not the joke, not the widow, the storm. And she was just getting started. The smoke from Perdition's ridge still clung to Clara's skin 2 days later when she rode back into Hollow Creek. Blood dried into the folds of her coat, her eyes harder than any bullet fired that week. Nathaniel rode beside her, a slow limp in his horse's gait mirroring the one in his body. Elijah had taken a separate path, vanishing the same way he'd appeared, like a ghost with debts to pay elsewhere. But Clara returned different. She didn't wait for anyone to open doors or glance up from porches. She rode straight down Main Street, where the townsfolk had once muttered behind her back, whispering about her weight, her silence, her loneliness. Now they only whispered her name. Clara, Lord above, she's the one who didn't think she'd survive, let alone win. Sheriff Boone was already waiting, standing with his thumbs hooked into his belt, jaw tight beneath his mustache. He wasn't the kind to apologize, and she wasn't the kind to wait for it. The Voss gang's done, Clara said before he could speak. What's left is tied up outside of Ridge Hollow. You can send the rest of your deputies up, but there won't be much work left for them. Boone looked her up and down like he was trying to match the woman in front of him to the one who'd stood in his office weeks before. You did all that. I wasn't alone. He shifted his jaw, cleared his throat, and tipped his hat. Town owes you thanks. I'm not here for thanks, she said. I want what's mine. And what's that? Land, respect, and silence from the ones who used to laugh. Boone nodded slowly. You'll have it. Clara turned, headed for the general store. She didn't need supplies. She just wanted to walk through the place where they used to smirk when she entered. The bell over the door jingled weakly, and Harrow's eyes went wide as she stepped inside. He reached for his apron like it might shield him. Miss May, he stammered. She walked slowly down the aisle, touching the sacks of flour, the racks of canning jars. She stopped at the front counter. Last time I came in here, you charged me extra for cracked eggs. Harrow swallowed. I recall, yes. She leaned closer, her voice quiet but firm. Next time I come in, you'll treat me the same as anyone else. No more, no less. He nodded, beads of sweat already forming on his brow. She turned and left. Outside, Nathaniel waited near the well. He'd seen it all. Every step, every stare. He didn't speak, just offered his hand. She took it. They walked through town like they owned it. Not because they'd asked to, but because they'd earned the right. Dust clung to their boots, and blood still crusted Clara's knuckles, but no one dared look away now. Later that night, in the cottage she once filled with silence, Clara sat across from Nathaniel, a fire between them. Her hair was damp from washing out the smoke. She wore a loose shirt and breeches, neither flattering nor feminine, and she'd never felt more like herself. You've changed, Nathaniel said quietly, cradling a cup of tea. She studied him a long moment before answering. No, I just stopped pretending I was someone else. He smiled, tired and proud. You know, I didn't fall in love with the woman you became. Clara raised an eyebrow. I fell in love with the one who was always underneath, he said. That silence between them held weight, but no burden. Later, she pulled out her old journal. She flipped past the pages of bitterness and doubt, past the lines written by a woman who thought she'd die invisible. She found a clean page. She wrote, They said I'd die alone, but I lived louder than they ever will, and I didn't need their permission. She tore the page out, tossed it into the fire, and let the flames eat the past. The next morning, a letter arrived. Official, sealed in red wax. Nathaniel opened it, read it twice, and passed it to Clara. It was from a state land registrar. The Voss land was now legally Blackthorne land, which meant Clara Mae Blackthorne now owned more acres than any woman in 2 counties. By midday, the mayor came calling, hat in hand, offering congratulations and vague apologies. Clara listened, said little, and let him sweat. When he left, she turned to Nathaniel. Let them choke on it, she said. But later, alone by the fence, she thought of the girl she used to be, the one who couldn't speak up, the one who cried over cake she was never invited to eat, the one who almost believed what they said about her. Clara wasn't that woman anymore, but part of her mourned her still. In the weeks that followed, Hollow Creek changed. The bakery where Clara once delivered bread hired her as a partner. The blacksmith asked for her opinion on tools. Even the preacher's wife came by with fresh milk and didn't mention God once. Just looked her in the eye and said, "I'm sorry." Clara didn't need forgiveness, but she nodded anyway. One evening, word came from a nearby town. A girl, heavy-set and poor, had been mocked off a wagon train and left to walk on foot. Clara didn't hesitate. She rode out alone. She found the girl half a day later, blistered and dusty, eyes red from shame. "Name's Clara," she said, offering water. "Mind if I ride with you a while?" The girl stared, dumbfounded. "You're her, the one from Hollow Creek." "I'm nobody," Clara said, "but I used to be you." They rode back together. Later, when the townsfolk asked who the girl was, Clara answered plainly, "She's staying with us, and anyone got a problem with that can speak to me directly." No one did. Nathaniel smiled as they walked home. "You're building something, Clara." She nodded. "Maybe a little piece." He looked out at the sunset. "You still think of the woman you used to be?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I think of her as someone I protected. I carried her through hell, and now she gets to rest." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. As the sun dipped behind the prairie and the wind softened into a sigh, Clara Mae Blackthorne stood taller than she ever had. She'd buried the ghost of who she used to be. She'd carved her name into a place that never welcomed her and forced it to make space. They said she'd die alone, but she didn't. She rode. She fought. She endured. And in the end, she became something no one could ever ignore again.